do that. All right, so look, I'm just going to kind of skip around over. I had three sort of main things I wanted to talk to you about. Um, I have a website. You can kind of go and explore all sorts of stuff here. The research part, papers, there's just a whole bunch. You can kind of go by category. I have been working broadly in complex systems since I came to the US. I'm from Australia originally, 94, and so before it was cool. Certainly, I did my PhD at MIT, and I walked in, and the guy I was going to work with had he was a good teacher. He was a really great teacher. He won teaching awards, and that is a death knell at these kinds of places. And so I found out he'd gone to Cornell the day I arrived. So anyway, and I said I want to work on complex systems, and people are like, no, you can't use those words, right? This is just no, you're not allowed to say those things. So it was very, academia is quite conservative, and that has some benefits. But this is also really about science. I would love to give you a big overview of everything, but I'll just touch on a few little topics to give you a sample of things. Just to sort of let you know, there are these overall pieces that I have. I frame them this way. I've got to change the names properly, but it's Principles of Complex Systems, Volume 1 and Volume 2, which is Pox. I call it Pox. There's a Twitter handle, which is PoxVox, like the voice of Pox. Storyology, which is sort of sneakily lives in here, and it's kind of language, stories, all sorts of meaning is in there. I'll talk about meaning today. We have a course on data ethics, which is a seminar. We run that usually in the spring, not this coming spring. And complex networks is a course I started years ago, and it folded into these ones as well. I'm now in computer science. I was in math for a long time, but they finally got rid of me. And I taught and loved linear algebra. So that course is still there if you want to learn it's a joy. Anyway, I have a YouTube thing which is sort of floating around. I put a lot of my course. I've been doing that since 2013. I would lug tripods in and try to record things, and robots and whatever, and it all went to pieces a lot. But there's a lot of material online now, and I've chunked it down into little pieces. So if you go to say, this is a course I'm teaching this full, this is the course. It's got silly things in it for some reason. There are tarot cards. I won't explain that, but you can play around. I have a cat called Pratchett, named after Terry Pratchett, so there's lots of Pratchett stuff. But things are kind of arranged in here, so the slides, if you want to go back later on, you can kind of get an overview of how it all works. The slides are fairly, strongly framed, and we'll get through in this semester to complexification. And so if you dive into one of them, let's say, actually, I'll do this one's a little bit of an overkill, but this is a happiness one. It's a long set of slides, and so it's broken into all these little clips, right? So there's lots of madness there, lots of crazy things in here. There's like measuring distributions of stretchable words, but it is actually quite serious. All right, so just that these things exist, right? I've sort of made this a big universal course. It's got lots of stuff in it. And I've done this. So I wanted to talk a little bit about pandemics. So this has been a long-term, so you guys are very young, but after SARS spread around the world in 2002 or 3, there was, again, this sort of, it's always there, but this kind of new interest again in like, how do we predict, and how do we kind of track these things? And this is sort of big fear, right? Like the airlines had increased in their connectivity, certainly to 120 years before. There's nothing, the world had changed completely in the way things could spread. And of course, we've seen that with information and stories and so on. I have a whole much larger body of work on social contagion, which continues to be super relevant. Unfortunately, this work that I'll show you quickly has been relevant again. What I wanted to point out about excess deaths, about pandemics, is that we just don't measure death well, right? So we need what I would call a grim scorekeeper. We do it slowly. It takes a while for just sheer numbers of deaths to be accumulated at different scales of countries. Some countries do it poorly, some do it very well. But even in the best, the most developed ones like the US, it maybe takes, it takes many weeks before you've got really a full count, a decent kind of estimate of how many people actually died on a given day, which is kind of amazing. So that's going to make it incredibly hard when a pandemic sweeps through and you don't know, it's a de novo event, you don't know about it, and you're going to be way behind the numbers when they take off. There have been a few places, Financial Times and The Economist, which I'm showing you here, have done a good job of trying to track excess deaths, which is just simply the number above expected. How do you figure that out? Well, you can do things like what's the last 5 years, try to take out any kind of bad trends and so on. And so this is, and I'll go down to, I think, the important one, which is here, if you can see this. So these are all updated. You can see this is through to October. This is Bulgaria, Russia. This is October, end of October. But somewhere North Macedonia, it's end of August. I think the US, they might only have the end of August here. CDC is getting that data through. But you can see here, this is the excess deaths per 100,000 people. So 1,000 people here, 1,000 here will be 1%, right? So that's really getting up there in terms of number of deaths. And it looks like, it looks like Russia might get to that, right? And it's been a big, the numbers have not been reported well at all from there. Peru, which has had was terribly hit. You can see it has these two giant storms. They actually recorded they did a good job. They have a pretty good system of recording this terrible thing. So, in terms of having a system where you're trying to monitor it and figure out what's going on, this was kind of waiting to be a big failure. An old colleague he's sort of a distant colleague, but a good, excellent human, Alex Vespignani. If you're interested in this sort of thing, I think this is the premier group in the world who's at Northeastern and comes out of complex systems and complex networks, and built up a whole pandemic research group in the last 20 years, and was the person, I think, the group most well placed to do this well, right? Like you need a kitchen sink type model situation here. There are many simple models, and maybe I'll show you some of their simple models, which tell you something about it. But that's it. That's the limit, right? They tell you stories about how things might spread, but you need to start measuring everything, just as we do for all sorts of systems. And I think they've done a good job, and in fact were helpful they became, through our suggestions, Vermont's main modeling agency. That certainly through the first year of the pandemic, I think we work with. Vermont is creeping up, right? So it's not doing so well recently, and there are lots of complicated reasons as to why that happens, which I don't have time to go into. But if you look down through this, you'll see the U.S. I think is here, but it's only August 21st, right? So we know there's a rise here that's not yet documented, but this is one in 400 and have died in excess. And the 1 in 160 gets us to something like what's known as the Dunbar's number, named after Robin Dunbar, which is this idea that our brains can handle about 150 people, like that we can kind of know 150 people quite well. So that these ones at the top are hitting that threshold of like it's closing in around people's social circles enough. Obviously, it's inhomogeneous, but it's closing in enough that it might, become a personal thing. Obviously, a deeply personal thing for many people. There are people who've died, of course, but the family members and friends, many, there's vast numbers of those people that are connected. So, I don't know how well this sits in people's minds, but it's really the Balkans have been hit really badly. South America has been hit really badly, but it is really spread out in complicated ways. In terms of the true toll, this is again The Economist. This is an effort to estimate the total number of deaths around the world. It's 10 to 20 million. That's a 95%. Obviously, very messy thing to estimate. They've done as well as they can here. And there have been few other estimates, but the recorded total is 5 million. So this is completely off, right? This is not even close. It's it's definitely historic. It's one in 100 years ago we had the 1918 influenza. That was the numbers are unclear, right? So if we look back through, do I have it here? Yeah, this is ordering of the major pandemics over the last couple of thousand years, and it's unclear, these numbers, right? 50% of the Mexican population. The reason we fear pandemics is really clear, right? From the history, we had no idea in detail why these things happen, right? They're acts of God, they're acts of all sorts of things can happen. And so these are really enormous. And the 1918 one ranks here. I know that's actually the typhus one. Doesn't even rank, I don't think. But it must. It must. Where is it? I've got it wrong. Anyway, all right. And of course, we're still going here, right? They seem to have the economist estimate built in. This is just wiki. But AIDS, HIV/AIDS is ongoing, right? It's the one, if you've looked through the history of this, and I would show this in class every year, that's the only one that hasn't closed off. We have treatment, but it is a particularly evil kind of spreading thing. Okay. So this is from the CDC, so it's a little bit more up to date. This is for the US. This is what's kind of expected in blue. The actual number of deaths is in blue. This is the orange thing here is their estimate of sort of a threshold for whether there have been more deaths than you might expect, how far off. And so you can see from the start of the pandemic, it's been spreading. There've been more deaths than expected all along the way, even when it was kind of in a lull. And this is, more recently. And of course, we run into Thanksgiving and Christmas, which are big mixing events again. And if unvaccinated people are more likely to be connected to unvaccinated people, then we have a brittle system still. So, yeah, robustness of systems is a big, big story. There are lots of things in there, forest fires, information, contagion, da, 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 da. So, and if you look at Florida, which has been a bit funny with its data, this is Florida. It's not coming up. Florida. Yeah. So you see what's happened with Florida is, in fact, this last peak has really been large. Again, this is presuming that data coming in from all of the states is fair enough and okay. I think some of them are a little slow and a bit strange when you look at some of the data, but it's actually had its worst event just recently with that third wave. I have quick things. I'll just touch on some of this. I don't want to go into it too much, but I'm going to have a problem with links, I think. Yeah. Some breakage. Okay, sorry. Okay. No. All right. I'll show a little bit of this. I'm just going to jump through some slides, right? So here's this problem. How do you predict how big these things are going to be? Right? There's an outbreak of, there's a bird flu spreading in Europe at the moment. How big will it be? Efforts to kind of put it on something like a hurricane scale. We're okay with not great, but we're not bad with hurricanes now. I mean, we have a lot of instrumentation, satellites, and so on. We can measure a lot. We need to improve that, but we have a deep understanding of how these things work. Katrina was wrong, right? We kind of, in a sense, it was not where it was expected to go, but I think we'd be better. We're better with that stuff now. So we can deal with these things reasonably well. Earthquakes, all of these other kinds of natural disasters, we have a good sense of how far they spread. And then there's this big problem of how big is this epidemic going to be? And I'm not going to go into this too much, but there's this sort of naive thing that if you know how many people one person might infect on average, then you should be able to kind of estimate things. But in fact, it's sort of a very rough number. It doesn't do a good job at all, right? So these all had about two, right? So you expect, this is sort of post hoc, right? The estimated number of people that were infected by one infected person was roughly 2 for all of these vastly different outcomes. SARS, we don't know the real number, but it's 1,000. It's not 100,000, right? So this is not a particularly useful thing, but it's stuck around. So this is a problem with the toy model that's become used in policy and so on. Lots of complex systems stories have these big, heavy-tailed distributions, right? So there are lots of little things. So forest fires, floods are good examples. Even war fatalities have this big skewed distribution. Wealth distributions like this as well, popularity of things. And there's usually some sort of gain in the system. There's some rich get richer mechanism that makes things take off. And of course, as humans, once we understand that, we try to goose the system, right? So there's a lot of cheating that goes on as well. So this is just, I'll flash through a few things. This is Iceland. What data do we have, right? And so it turns out Iceland's been recording things quite well since the late 1800s at provincial levels and then at the level of the country. And in some sense, we can kind of think this is for measles, that these are kind of isolated outbreaks, right? That the and there's sort of decades in between some of them. It affects children, of course, terribly, and so they, new people are born and they grow up, so they're going to be have no immune response whatsoever. So in some, as a rough thing, and of course these are much more complicated than say earthquakes or something where there's not much we can actually do about them once they take off. Of course, with diseases, we quarantine, we do all sorts of things, which is really the great complication for us. Anyway, if you study this, what you start to see is that, and I'll just show you this, and I'll just tell you that we made a model that reproduced this kind of basic idea, which is, this is for measles, rubella, and pertussis or whooping cough. There's a little break on that y-axis. So many times there was a little outbreak and it didn't go very far, right? And many models can sort of get the basics of this, but once it did take off, there was this sort of very uniform distribution. There's not a lot of data here, but there's very uniform distribution. So the predictability of it is about as low as you can get, right? So things spread once they take off, and we're not really sure how far it'll go. And so this is, of course, for a real system. There's this other feature. This is from SARS, and again, the data here is not great. It's a misreporting, but these are deaths according to SARS. So it's this resurgence thing. So if you're sitting here thinking, in history, thinking, oh, this thing is going away, it's not that bad, then, this is a very surprising kind of periods of time, right? Some of this is data being lumped in, for cases that hadn't been recorded properly. But in terms of you're sitting here in history, you're thinking, well, maybe not. Anyway, we managed to get around that one. It wasn't as dangerous or as, nothing like COVID, and certainly nothing like diseases of the past. But this phenomenon doesn't get produced by simple models. So we wanted to kind of understand that as well. And the fact that once it takes off, the spreading is incredibly uniform. There are videos from community in here, so I'll just ignore them. But this is Vespignani's model. This is the big deal thing where it's like, okay, I'm going to use phone data, transportation data, like how are people moving around, like really try to do this like we would with climate or something like that, right? With weather systems. And they've been really helpful. Early on, the estimates were for Vermont, 30 to 3,000 deaths. We're, in a logarithmic sense, we're a little bit over halfway, right? 600 deaths. So, we haven't done the best we could have done, but we certainly haven't done the worst, but we will see. Lots of clever things. This is another one where you can, by looking at times at which something spread around the world, you can figure out where it started. And so there's a little simulation that actually this Chicago is kind of the center. This is a network kind of story because we have all these airline networks connecting everything these days. So if something spreads and we don't know about it, we can look back and see if we sort of pick up the right origin and arrange it, we could see that this spreads out like a nice circle essentially from that origin. Yeah, that's fine. So of course we like to blame wherever things come from. I guess the 1918 one is still unclear, right? It's called the Spanish flu, not in Spain, but it's called the Spanish flu by a lot of Western countries. But there's some suggestion it may have started in Kansas, and it's unclear what its real origins were. Anyway, so you can this is a population based on groups and networks. Sociology is groupology, right? That's the root of that word. So in some sense, I got that one right. This is a PNAS paper from a long time ago. I don't really want to go into it, but we run this thing, and we get this kind of output, right? Where a lot of things don't take off. This is the size of the epidemic, the fractional size, spreading really pretty awfully uniformly. This is another example with a much more infectious disease. And you can run the simulations here and you can get this kind of resurgence thing, right? So it looks like it's not spreading, but what happens is someone travels to another group and gets them infected, right? Someone goes to a wedding, someone goes to a choir and sings, whatever it is. This happens over and over again. So it's this, the part of this is the rare events matter so much. It's very brittle and dangerous, and our desire to sort of shut things down is very reasonable, but of course has terrible economic impacts, and there's all sorts of, this is a very difficult thing to deal with. Anyway, this was basically the upshot of this was just these things are deeply unpredictable, right? And that's kind of the awful thing that I just have to sort of say. It's just the deeply unpredictable. Historically, we can manufacture simple models that show that how this works as well. Again, it's a sort of rare events popping from group to group. And, our sort of historic kind of concern, it's in movies and books, in stories, pandemics, right? We worry about these things tremendously. We've had it for thousands of years. It's bad. Okay, so I'm just scooting through this. I wanted to show you something completely different then, because I want to give you just a few samples of things. Yes. Okay. So one project we've built for the last, I guess, we started thinking about this in 2007 and eventually made this kind of online thing here. So it's measuring happiness, right? So we're just going to we want to figure out how to measure happiness from expressed text, right? And we thought text would be good. This is obviously a long time ago. Facebook's sort of still taking off. Twitter exists and is still kind of getting going. And our first analyses were things like State of the Union speeches, blogs, music lyrics, stuff like that, right? So this is sort of things that we could find. This is for Twitter, right? So this is a time series of happiness, and I won't tell you how we measure, but it's very simple kind of bag of words thing. It involves evaluations by people. You can mess around and sort of see. This is October 2019. So this is 2000 here. And we'd never seen this before in our measurement of happiness. It's a measurement of happiness and sadness, right? That's what it is. And so this is the advent of the COVID, like the awareness of it becoming global, that it's a pandemic. It was talked about back in January, and there was definitely some sense that a bad thing is happening in China. But then there's like the Super Bowl and some other stuff happens, and we didn't quite, right? We're just like, it's probably okay. But of course, the thing is spreading everywhere. So there's a huge drop, and I know I have it in some other slides. I might not get to them, but within about 10 minutes, Trump gave a speech where he sort of, for the first time, said this isn't great, and the stock market just went tick, 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 the whole way down while he was giving this from the Oval Office or whatever. So that was bad. Tom Hanks said he had COVID, so that's bad because people like him. He's one of those people that most people like. Like you really have to suck to hate him. I think it's like Fred Rogers or something. Or Dolly Parton, yeah. Anyway, so that was bad, and the NBA suspended its season, like very abruptly, right? So that all happened within about 20 minutes. And I have this written up in a paper. There was also, at the same time, Sarah Palin was in a bear suit on The Masked Singer singing Baby Got Back. So it was that bit of history is kind of lost, but I like to kind of keep it tagged around because it's, what do we remember, right? We have all this work on computational history, computational timeline stuff, and what I call chronopathy, the speeding up and slowing down of things. And just to say, during this period, we kind of wrote a whole thing around Trump. During this period, things slowed down tremendously. And that, maybe your personal feeling, but we want to quantify it on the kind of collective scale. So it's what I call collective chronopathy, which is the ill feeling or the weird feeling, how you feel with time. And we have this anecdotal thing, like yesterday felt like a week, the last hour took a year or whatever, or time flies when you're having fun. We have this sort of ways of talking about it. But we're able to sort of show that maybe 2 weeks in April 2020 felt like normally what 2 days would feel like in the years before in terms of like turnover of stories. So it was a measure of story turbulence. And then it slowed down again when it sped up when George Floyd was murdered because the stories now explode, right? There's different stories going on. Terrible thing happens. It's the lowest we've ever seen this happiness measurement piece go down. And these slow relaxation or these responses getting back up to kind of normal levels, we've never seen that before. Usually a bad thing happens, like beloved celebrity dies, like Robin Williams, or there's a terrorist attack, or a school shooting, these awful things happen, and there's a big drop because everyone's talking about it, but then it gets washed away with all these other stories. At this big aggregate level, like is this in the memory of the system? And here you have a long memory. There's other things happen, then it kind of blows up again in terms of narrative. There's after the election, things really kind of jumble around, and then there's of course the January 6th storming of the Capitol, so that's another big drop. And again, this is through the lens of Twitter, right? So That's fair enough. But there's a whole time series here. We have these kinds of interesting things where, let me get to 2020. So you can compare, these are like grown up kind of word cloud things, but they're word shifts. You can play around with them. You can, this shows you the words that are being used on this day that are dropping it down, right? So terrorist, protest, violence, protesters, racist. So you can see it's a bit complicated. These are the protests after George Floyd's murder, and terrorist is an interesting word to see appear. So you can kind of dig into why that's there. But overall, it's going to try to tell you if things are making sense. So you can kind of play around. It's a nice little JavaScript thing. This is moving from day to day, like what's happening in terms of word turnover. Yeah, that was a big deal. Oh, okay. So look, there's a lot of things. I'll just show you one direction we went with this. Hopefully this will work. I'm not going to get to all these things. Yeah, so this is how we doing?
Well, there's no reason why the simple shapes of stories can't be fed into computers. They are beautiful shapes. This is the GI axis, good fortune, ill fortune.
Volume.
Is the shape of the curves of what matters and not their origins. So we'll start a little above average.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Nope.
Sound of it again.
All right. Okay. Anyway, the picture is here. This is Kurt Vonnegut.
And this is easy to find online.
Did you see here? He made this this little graph, which is it's good fortune, ill fortune. This is what he kind of would trot around with this and had a lot of fun. He'd have his blackboard out, and time goes in this direction. And this is stories, right? So he's saying this is a basic story, and he called this Man in a Hole. And his little bit there is that people love this story, right? This is just like something goes wrong. And you may have a show or a sitcom you watch, like I was thinking about It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. That's the arc of every show, right? Like things go south. They maybe not get back to where they are, but it's a basic kind of way. Okay, so that might just seem like a kind of a fun thing. In that one, he also has Cinderella. He does it in a sort of very charming way, right? He talks about metamorphosis, which is just things go bad, right? If you turn into a cockroach, it's not great. Exploring different ways of things going bad. This is just emotional arcs, right? And this is it's a big piece of it. It's not plots. This is an attempt to do plots, and I think we're trying to do this sort of thing automatically across stories. This is XKCD. This is which characters are interacting with each character, right? So this is a temporal network story here. How do you get this out of a text or a movie script? Interesting thing to play with, I think. So in Hedonimy, there's all these other pieces here. So here's a book example. So this is Frankenstein for you, right? So Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. So, scientists show that it ends badly. Well done, scientists. There's Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, right? Or the Chamber of Plot Devices. So this is what we're going to do is now just slide this thing through it and measure happiness scores as we go through. And then we can do those little comparisons again. It's a little more advanced. You can, compare different sections to each other. You can kind of make these little reference things. So you can imagine doing this for lots of things where there's some time aspect, right? And stories can be, of course, expressed in different orders, and that's complicated. One of those although, of course, you as the viewer or the reader track through it in that way. So your experience of it, you're like, oh, this is from the past or whatever, but you're experiencing potentially a good or bad thing. And let me get this other one here. Oh yeah, so Harry, this is like Harry, when you put them all together, this is Harry Potter, put them all together. And this is a spoiler, and it's your fault if you haven't read it and you want to, but it's Dumbledore bites it here, right? So it picks up the right kinds of things. We've never actually published this. We have one for movies, which is kind of fun. This is is it? No, that's the ranked one. Okay, it's this one. Yeah, so this is Pulp Fiction, right? So you can kind of wind your way through it, and in this case, it shows you the script. The script changes. It shows you where you are in the script. You can't get the final script because of money, but this is going to be close. Like Ripley is a man in Alien. The script we have for Alien, Ripley is a man, which is weird to look at, but I know you've probably never, but Pulp Fiction, yeah, if you've ever seen this point here is bring out the GIMP, right? This is the low point here. Okay, yeah. We had this little thing here where you could try to annotate it. So anyway, we'll work on that. So that's a whole body of work, and Andy Reagan did this. It's not plots, right? So that's a whole thing that I think is, sitting there. This is 12 Angry Men, which is a jury, so that's very funny, right? They're just 12 people that are stuck together. Star Wars. This is time travel. Who knows? There's a beautiful 3D kind of version. It's a nice book. This is let me see. This is the Princess Bride actually, and this is the good Star Wars, which is Empire Strikes Back. Okay, so of course you have to go to Moby Dick and look at Moby Dick. I mean, I've showed you this kind of viewer thing. It depends who's reading it.
Chris, I'm not teaching you anything. We're just
you can't read it, but you can't hear it.
No, I know you're not.
I hate metaphors. That's why my favorite book is Moby Dick. No symbolism, just a good simple tale about a man who hates an animal. Anyway, so people love the Moby Dick thing. I'll just go through some of this. But we can here's a different couple of time series for that. Moby Dick ends badly. Again, not if you're the whale. This is Crime and Punishment in Russian, Count of Monte Cristo in French, and in that case he wins, right? So things end triumphantly. So that we ended up with, and I'll just show you those 6 scripts. This is Andy Reagan made this ridiculous contraption which you could plug a book in. And
we've got Harry Potter. We've got the hedometer here. We're gonna go ahead and plug in, and it's gonna
analyze you plug it in, and it would chart the little
book. Here we go. Harry Potter. We've got Harry Potter. It's reading the book, plotting the arc. Things are getting better.
So, but we ended up with these sort of 6 different. I don't have the right plot in here, but they're very sort of Fourier-like things. These different arcs. So there was the rags to riches story. We gave them names: rags to riches, tragedy. There's Vonnegut's Man in a Hole. There's Icarus, right? So things are going well. And then we had Oedipus, which goes like this: boom, ends badly when you realize you've done something very terrible. And Cinderella is, as Vonnegut would say, off-axis happiness. We ended up, I think our best citation for this was a kind of a New Yorker cartoon, which basically just flatly said there are 6 fundamental plots or something, which isn't true. This is not about plots. This is about emotional arcs. So, stories matter, right? This is Make America Great Again. It's 4 words, and it tells you about the past, the present, and the future. It's a very powerful setting of words. And I'm sort of trying, outside of all of this, I mean, I sort of think the left is terrible at coming up with slogans, just dreadful. And the right is very good, and good at being, unified around it. And of course, this is not a new thing. This was Let's Make America Great Again was a kind of part of the campaign for Reagan and Bush in 1980. So it had a bit of a let's at the front, which is a bit of a collective thing, but that got dropped off. And many people have used it. I think Bill Clinton, there's some arguments about who owned it at some point. But anyway, so it's of course become a slogan. Okay, so stories. Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of what we do is on stories now. I think about stories a lot, so I am going to jump off of that one. There's more I could tell you there. So that was about emotional arcs. So it's this kind of simple measure of happiness and sadness. So what do we do with that? How does that actually work? Well, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I can't show you, but basically you would, many people have done something like this. You would present words to people, could be other things, or images and so on, but words are so powerful. So you present words to people and ask them on some axis, like, do you feel happy or sad, basically, when you see this word? And you might ask what they think a random person might think. There are lots of ways to ask this, but these are semantic differentials, right? You're asking someone, and so you could present people with words and say, how do you feel on an axis of rough to smooth, right? Or good to bad, like all these things. And so if you give people enough semantic differentials and you give them enough words and you use words that people actually use, then you can start to get a sense of what the fundamental dimensions of meaning are. And so that's what this work that we've kind of finished up this year has done. And I'll just touch on a few things. Let me see if I can. It's a tricky one, right? What's meaning mean? This is pretty awful. We're using the words to define meaning. So it gets a little bit, Merriam-Webster, which by the way, pretty aggressive. We know the guy behind it, pretty aggressive. Twitter handle, so you don't want to talk smack to that thing. So what are the essential characteristics? All right, so just to give you a summary of where this goes, maybe nope, I can't do it. There's some problems with these things. This is a sort of game from a long time ago. It's famous. This is Osgood, is sort of the big name here. It's from the 50s. These are all these semantic differentials, like, right, as I said, pleasant, unpleasant, da, 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 da. How do you rate something on these scales? And then we'll sort of sort it out. And the original, well, there are a few different works, but one of the original pieces of precursor to this is actually for pings, right? For sounds coming from submarines. Like this is in the 40s and then 50s. Someone who's an operator, like, how do they feel? How do they feel? In response, is this a danger signal? Whatever it is, right? And so this is a kind of a remarkable PhD thesis, which combined naval warfare, the essence of meaning, and semantic differentials. It's kind of a strange business. Anyway, so came up with a new word because it's sort of madness we do. This other thing was hedonimeter, so it's hedonometrics. We have a lexicocalorimeter, allotaxonometry, lots of made up things. But, they're all meaningful, and we sort of are doing that purposefully. Someone might say obnoxiously, but just because there's a space that we need to put things into. And if we're going to get all these sciences to keep advancing, measurement is the basic thing, right? So, and I have a whole thing on that. But you just have to measure things well. We didn't measure time well. We didn't measure temperature well. We thought we could never do that. There's all sorts. When you look through the history of measurement, it's pretty messy. So, the fact that we're struggling with some of the more complex aspects of the world, fair enough. So ousiometrics is the word here. So ousia, it's where essence comes from, and the idea is we're measuring the essence of something. Another word down here is telenomics, which is remote sensing of knowledge. So that's for this kind of idea of distant reading. So that's kind of what we're doing, say, with some of that emotional arc stuff. All right, so there's a lot of stuff, but going back in the 1800s, there's even this idea of like a kind of a three-dimensional, two-dimensional space of meaning, and I'm just going to thrash through this sort of stuff. I'm having trouble with Here's sort of a problem. You tell people we're going to measure valence. You don't even use that word, but you say at one end you might feel this happiness, pleasure, hopefulness. You might despair at the other end. So it's a bit of a fuzzy. These are fuzzy kinds of endpoints. These are hard to kind of tell people. I want you to really think like this. So you do it. You do SPD or PCA or whatever, and kind of work through things. And here's kind of this original conception of valence, which is this happy, sad kind of dimension. Arousal, terrible term, but it just means kind of energy level. And then dominance, like, it's more like, do you feel powerful or in control? It's more about control or not in control. And this is 20,000 words, and you can see they're not uniformly filling this space like they're supposed to. And if you look around at it and kind of look from the side, you start to see that these things are correlated, and they're correlated because the words trying to describe them are correlated. And I'll just jump through this, but if you undo a lot of stuff here and turn it all around, this is what I call an ousiogram. You get this structure out. And so this is what I'll call a compass of essential meaning. So there's this big axis this way is power and weakness, right? And you can see example words in all of these places. And then this is this dangerous safe one. And I think this is the one that we've really most strongly kind of elucidated that wasn't really clear at all for the last 70 or 80 years. And so up here you have words like killer, bloodbath, murderer, right? These are terrible things. They're extremely dangerous. And safe down here is softness, natural, serenity. And as you move around to safe towards powerful, you start to get wisdom, generous. These are good things. You're helping other people. You're helping yourself. This is a good space. And in some ways, this is the positivity place. This is the search for happiness, right? Like the pursuit of happiness is kind of this quadrant is the space. And as you move around here, you start powerful has things like triumphant, success, there's conquer, and it becomes more like competitor and wrestler, some sports things, adrenaline. It gets a little more dangerous. And then you get into this sort of dangerous, powerful thing, which is military stuff, earthquakes, hurricanes, like they're big and dangerous. And out here, you start to get stuff like bankruptcies, some swearing, disagreeable, illnesses, chaos and toxic are up here. And as the danger level goes down, you get to nothing, right? You get to void, right? The opposite of power is just nothingness. And then moving around here, you've got tortoises and cotton and sofa. These are soft, benign spaces. And then you come right back. Chipmunk, for some reason, is in the middle. All right. You can go through slices of this. There's another dimension in here, which is what I've called structure. But at one end of that, if you think about people, it's play and playfulness and seriousness. All right, so I'm going to show you a few things. This is these enthusiograms and synonyms. Sorry, I said the wrong words. Enthusionyms and synonyms, which is like synonyms and antonyms, but it's just like in essential meaning, what's opposite. So what's opposite to killer? Natural, tranquil. Opposite to volcanic is couch, but not not in their real full meanings, but in their essential stripped down meaning. So there's lots of things here, blah blah blah. Okay, so if you go and look at, and I'll show you this one. If you then go and look at the words that people actually use in corpora, so that was just a lexicon, right? Each word had one vote. Now we're going to look at words and say, okay, how many words are being actually used? Like, which words are people using? So this is Jane Austen's works, the Sherlock Holmes novels and stories, New York Times for 20 years. This is Twitter. There's an enormous data set here. It's like almost 1 billion words. Radio talk. So this is one that isn't text, right? This is, it's text, but it's from spoken radio, right? It's translated into, it's been, into words. So that's a couple of years of that. So it's everything from NPR to shock jocks, right? It's a real mess. And then Wikipedia here, like one thing of Wikipedia. And you see the higher, right? The redder color is down in the bottom. That's the safe dimension, right? So this extends work that we did maybe 5 or 6 years ago, which built again on 70 or 80 years of work, which basically was that this axis was where words tend to be used, where people in conversation and in all these different sort of fora use words out in this direction. And so this is kind of where happiness sort of is, right? So it was this, or positivity. So this was this idea of a positivity bias, which is called the Pollyanna principle. It's been around for a long time. And it may, you think everything is toxic and so on, but, language is a great social technology, right? Money is something else, encoding of belief. There are these really powerful things we have. And in general discourse, people tend to use good, somewhat positive words, right? There are deeply negative words. They're all still used. You see there's still words at the top. We just don't use them all the time. And they're very meaningful and so on, but that's not the preponderance of discussion. So this is this idea of a safety bias in language. You can turn this in, and I'll show you just a few more things at the end. The Uziamada, this is like our hedonimeter, but now it's for danger and power. And so this one over here, this is power, structure, danger. This is January 6th, right? So this is the insurrection. You see the danger signal goes up. And really, power doesn't change so much. So what's happening here is that danger was the right compass point for this measurement. You can decompose it into sort of a goodness and energy piece. So danger is bad energy, right? It's like energy minus goodness. You can think of it like that. So we could have just had this work, but this is once we have this sort of compass laid out, it shows us that it's deeply meaningful. This is Harry Potter. This is danger for the last 2 books, for example. Power and danger. You can see this in orange here is the last one. Is sort of surges of very dangerous events happening, right? Which is, you get a similar thing if you just said like the happy, sad thing, but it's very explicitly about danger. You can play around so here's alignment charts from D&D, right? So this fits well. You can talk about structure, lawful good being structured and powerful and safe. This is Tripler's Basic Laws of Human Stupidity. It's unusual for an economist in the 70s to say that people aren't rational, but it was this idea of, the labeling's not great, but stupid people basically hurt themselves and hurt others. And he had this, you should look it up, but it's basically the idea that the damage they do, everyone always underestimates that the proportion of stupid people in any population is the same. Professors, whatever, especially professors. Anyway, you can sort of interpret it there. And then I'll leave you with, I'll just sort of play around with this a little bit at the end here. So this is a completely different data set, 800 characters that have been rated on 200 of these semantic differential dimensions. It's a completely different thing, sort of an online fun thing. And so I don't know how well you'll know some of these stories, but it's a bit of a mixture, a lot of TV and movies, but also Pride and Prejudice, for example, is in here. So this is just pops out that it looks like we have a very similar kind of thing. So again, danger, safe is this way, powerful, weak is this way. And so Jean-Luc Picard and Adama, so these sort of leaders are out here in this powerful thing. You see Hermione Granger is out here as well. Then these dominant characters like Tywin Lannister, right? So Game of Thrones people. Game of Thrones tend to be all up in here. Cersei Lannister is more up here. She's dangerous. And then you've got Voldemort, the Joker, and Sue Sylvester from Glee, who within their own scopes are basically the same character. And you go around here, these are the chaos agents, right? So this is Erlich Bachman from Silicon Valley. The Bluths from Arrested Development are kind of live out here. And then these are nincompoops like Homer Simpson, Michael Scott from The Office. These are people who basically just make a mess of things. And then these are sort of nice, friendly people. Rex from Toy Story, the dinosaur. You know, they're less dangerous. And then your angels are basically down here, right? So like Jane Bennett, from MASH is in here, Jared Dunn. These people help other people. They're good people. And it may not end well for them, but they're generally kind of good people. Charles Boyle from Brooklyn Nine-Nine. You can look at them within particular story verses. So the Wizard of Oz, lots of safe, good people, and then the bad actors are up here. This is Arrested Development. So it's if you've ever seen this show, it's a bunch of chaos agents, some of whom are more on the dangerous axis. A couple of nincompoops over here who are not going to hurt anyone. And then it's from the opening theme song. Basically, it's like there's the one son who tried to keep them all together is Michael Bluth, and then his son is sort of just a good person. Game of Thrones, just Danger Will Robinson, right? Just they're all out in here. There's this is a very weak, ineffectual character. Bad things happen to him, and he's your sort of one teddy bear-like character in the whole space. Harry Potter, pretty big spread. You can see the dots are sort of more centered, so they're not so extreme. Perhaps the most extreme one is there's Voldemort, but also Bellatrix Lestrange, who's basically just dangerous. Lord of the Rings, not a lot of character separation here, right? So the hobbits are kind of paired together. Gandalf, Legolas, Aragorn are all together. This is Boromir and Gimli. They're not particularly separated. Gollum is the chaos agent here. Orange is the New Black. Everyone's pretty dangerous in this one. This is Pride and Prejudice. You've got your angel type people, some chaos agents over here. The people who end up with each other tend to have similar essential dimensions, actually. Elizabeth and Mr. Darcy. Okay, so there's a billion of those. Like I said, there's like, there's about 90. I think we have 90 storyverse things. So I realize this is just a bit of a mixture for you, and we'll see what you think. But happiness is power plus safety. It's sort of the opposite. Anyway, that's new work, and we're kind of building out from it in lots of different fun ways. But what else should I tell you? I think that's enough. Splatterings. Okay. Right? We switch it off, yeah? 12:50. Okay, all right. Okay. All right, well, thank you for coming. And there's lots of stuff to rummage around on. The last thing I should say is I work with Chris Danforth, Computational Story Lab is our group. I'm the director of the Vermont Complex Systems Center. We have a lovely group of humans. And if you're interested in what we do, you should write to us. Okay.